I spent like a couple of days or so, hours, trying to work on this. First one I felt was okay, but this one is more polemical. It even has objections, a section on objections and stuff, and refuting them and stuff. I don't know, I guess I asked it as well to compare me to like other Christian nation defenses or polemics, and it says it ranks me or this essay among the best. I'm like, okay, maybe if that's true, I wanted to copy and paste it into the description box of the video, and you can just look at it for yourself or so if it helps. Try to make sure each quote is accurate or so, and I'm not using paraphrases right, but I apologize if there is one or so, or if there's an inaccuracy. But overall, like, I'm pleased with the, I guess this is an essay, right? Because it's an essay form, and I wanted to go over where I was contemplating with the Lord, and then put the ideas into the ChatGPT and see like other things that we could work on, and spend like several hours. But anyway, so I called it the American Covenant, a polemical defense of the Christian origins of the United States. Introduction. I have like 5 parts, and then I have an objection section. Introduction starts with, the United States of America was not born from the abstractions of deism, secularism, or rationalism. It was conceived within a distinctly Christian, biblical, and covenantal imagination, shaped by Protestant dissent, Lockean Christianity, and a providential understanding of divine governance. The Revolutionary War, mockingly called the Presbyterian Rebellion by the British, revealed that America's liberty was a Protestant liberty, grounded in the conviction that freedom is a divine trust bestowed by God. From the pulpits of the Revolution to the pen of Jefferson and the prayers of Washington, the American founding unfolded as a historical manifestation of biblical principles: liberty under God, covenant before state, and conscience above kings. 1. The Revolutionary War, a Protestant rebellion and biblical covenant. British loyalists described the American Revolution as, quote, the Presbyterian Rebellion, acknowledging the central role of Protestant clergy and congregations in igniting the cause of liberty. Sermons thundered with texts from Exodus and the prophets. Preachers like John Witherspoon, Jonathan Mayhew, and Ezra Stiles proclaimed that the struggle for liberty was not merely political, it was covenantal. Ezra Stiles, in his 1783 sermon, The United States Elevated to Glory and Honor, envisioned America as a, quote, new Israel, and, quote, chosen not by blood but by belief, founded upon divine purpose and moral law. Such preaching gave rise to what historians like Aaron Shalev called the, quote, biblical conscience, end quote, and, quote, scriptural imagination, end quote, of the founding generation. Americans viewed themselves as heirs to the covenant made with Israel, a people bound by God's moral law and providentially chosen for liberty. Thus, the revolution was not secular in spirit, but sacred in conscience, animated by the same God who delivered Israel from Pharaoh's bondage. 2. The Declaration of Independence, Lockean Christianity, and the biblical God. The Declaration of Independence rests on the theological foundation of Lockean Christianity, not the empty abstraction of deism. John Locke's reasonableness of Christianity reveals that his political theology presupposed a personal creator, the God of the Bible, who endowed humanity with reason, moral law, and natural rights. Locke's God was not the distant deity of deist speculation, but the Christian God of providence and covenant. Jefferson, in composing the Declaration, referred to its ideas as reflecting the, quote, American mind, end quote. John Adams clarified what that meant when he wrote that, quote, the general principles of which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity, end quote. The declarations appeal to, quote, nature's God, end quote, the, quote, creator, end quote, and, quote, the divine providence, end quote, reflects a Lockean synthesis of reason and revelation, where freedom and faith are harmonized. under one biblical order. This Lockean Christian synthesis rejects the secular distortion that America's founding was religiously neutral. The founders' God was no mere concept. He was, in their lived experience, the active covenantal deity, guiding them from dependence to independence through the Constitutional Convention, Providence, and the hand of God. During the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin rose and called for prayer, warning that, quote, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid, end quote. Franklin, often misrepresented as a deist, affirmed that he had, quote, lived a long time, end quote, and seen, quote, convincing proofs that God governs in the affairs of men, end quote. James Madison likewise recognized this divine guidance, noting the, quote, finger of that almighty hand, end quote, in the Constitution's creation. Washington described the same divine agency as the, quote, invisible hand, end quote, guiding America's destiny. Their belief was not metaphorical, it was experiential. Providence was a historical reality, not a philosophical idea. For the federal constitution and dissenting Christian order, the Constitution reflects the genius of Christian dissent, not the triumph of secularism. The separation of church and state was not a denial of religion. It was a theological principle drawn from the biblical model of Moses and Aaron, distinct offices of governance under one divine sovereignty. America's founders, adherers to the English dissenting tradition, understood that liberty of conscience requires freedom from ecclesiastical domination, but not from religious morality. Thus, America became a Christian people without becoming a Christian church. The government was not founded upon a particular denomination, but was sustained by the moral and cultural vitality of a dissenting Christian populace, a people whose laws, education, and virtues were biblically shaped. 5. American religion, scriptural imagination, and biblical conscience. American religion is defined by the scriptural imagination and biblical conscience cultivated by dissenting Christianity and Lockean moral philosophy. The distinct Christian character of the people, manifested in civic virtue, education, and moral culture, ensured that liberty, law, and national identity were grounded in the covenantal God. Pluralism, separation of church and state, and constitutional mechanisms complemented this character rather than undermining it, ensuring that freedom and religion coexisted under the same divine order. Conclusion: the American covenant. The American founding was not a secular experiment, but a sacred covenant. It united Lockean liberty with biblical faith, dissenting conscience with divine providence, and national independence with moral dependence upon God. The founder's God was not a construct of the imagination, but the living providence who, quote, governs in the affairs of all men, end quote. The Revolution, the Declaration, and the Constitution form a continuous covenantal arc. From a Protestant rebellion to a Christian republic, America's greatness lies not in her might, but in her moral memory. The conviction that liberty is a divine trust, and that a republic, quote, made only for a moral and religious people, end quote, can endure only under the sovereignty of the biblical God. This is the American covenant, our enduring charter under the God of liberty, law, and grace. And then it goes into objections and refutations. Tried to come up with as many, like at least 10 at least. The first one is the Constitution is a godless document because it does not mention God. Fallacies, argument from silence, absence of evidence is not equal to evidence, does not equal evidence of absence. The refutation is this objection wrongfully assumes that the omission of the word God implies disbelief. In reality, the framers exercised theological restraint. The moral and legal structure of the Constitution presupposes a creator and divine law. John Adams emphasized that the Declaration of Independence was grounded in the general principles of Christianity. Madison recognized divine providence as guiding the convention, noting the finger of that almighty hand and the Constitution's creation, Franklin affirmed God's governance in human affairs. The Constitution's silence protected religious liberty without denying God's authority. Objection 2. The First Amendment separates church and state, so the U.S. cannot be Christian. It's a fallacy. False equivalence, straw man, refutation, straw man. And the refutation is the framers separated church establishment from government control, not moral or religious influence from public life. Jefferson's, quote, wall of separation, and, quote, protected liberty of conscience. The founders intended a dissenting Christian people to sustain civic virtue independent of a national church. Public morality and religion were inseparable in their worldview, as Washington and Adams emphasized. This reflects a dissenting church model where national religion is defined by the people's covenantal character rather than a government institution. Objection 3. The founders were deists, not Christians. It's a fallacy of hasty generalization. Refutation is while a few founders, such as Thomas Paine, were deists, the majority, including Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, Washington, and Madison, were deeply influenced by Christian ethics. Franklin rebuked Paine's anti-Christian claims, asserting the importance of Christian moral order. Jefferson reflected a Lockean Christianity in his reasoning for liberty. The moral and civic virtues essential to Republican government presuppose a God of Christian revelation, not a generic deity. Objection 4. Christianity and Republican government are incompatible. It's a fallacy, a false dichotomy. Refutation. Only a virtuous people shaped by Christian ethics could sustain Republican liberty. Washington's farewell address declares that, quote, religion and morality are indispensable supports, end quote, of free government. Sermons by clergy, such as Ezra Stiles, frame the American conscience in biblical covenantal terms, demonstrating that Christianity and republicanism were mutually reinforcing. Objection 5. America's moral order can be maintained without Christianity. Fallacy, reductionism, chronological snobbery. Refutation. The founders' liberalism presuppose Locke's Christian God. Virtue and civic responsibility are derived from biblical moral law. Adams wrote, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. The American Republic relies on the dissenting Christian conscience, biblical morality, and civic virtue. Objection 6. The Declaration's references to God are deist, not biblical. Fallacy is misrepresentation and selective evidence. The refutation is the Declaration invokes a personal creator and moral providence consistent with the covenantal God of Scripture. Phrases like, quote, supreme judge of the world, end quote, and divine providence, end quote, reflect Lockean Christianity, not impersonal deism. The founders' liberalism presuppose a God who guides history and sustains justice. Objection 7. The founders wanted to exclude religion from politics. Fallacy is straw man. Refutation. The founders oppose clerical control, not moral or religious guidance. Public prayers, proclamations, and of thanksgiving and reliance on providence show that religion informed political life. Dissenting Christians helped shape a culture and civic conscience that sustained the republic without imposing a state church. Objection 8. Christianity has historically produced oppression, so it cannot be foundational to liberty. Fallacy, a genetic fallacy, guilt by association, refutation, historical abuses of institutional churches do not negate the moral principles of Christianity. Biblical justice, mercy, and liberty inspired the American Revolution. Abolitionist movements and civic reforms, Ezra Stiles and other clergymen framed the American conscience with scriptural imagination and proving that liberty flourished through biblical principles. Objection 9. A Christian republic is a contradiction. It requires a national church. Fallacy is a category error. Refutation. A Christian republic is defined by the people, culture, and moral education shaped by Christian conscience, not by state church. Tocqueville observed that religion in America governs, quote, without power, end quote, demonstrating the distinction between institutional establishment and moral cultural foundation. Schools, civic virtue, and public ethics reflect the dissenting Christian people. Objection 10. The Constitution supports slavery, proving America is not Christian. fallacies, moral absolutism, selective evidence, refutation. The Constitution avoided explicit endorsement of slavery. Many founders opposed it on moral and biblical grounds. Lincoln appealed to Scripture to affirm the equality of all men, invoking the Imago Dei. Enslaved people also appealed to the same God for justice and freedom. Comparing Jefferson's Bible with the slave Bible demonstrates that true Christian principles supported liberty, not bondage. Objection 11. The Treaty of Tripoli and the Constitution's silence on God prove the United States was not a Christian nation. Fallacy, misinterpretation, false equivalence, confusing the national institution with the nation itself. Refutation, Article 11 of the 1797 Treaty of Tripoli declares, saying the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Secular critics often misread this as evidence that the nation as a whole was not Christian. This is a false equivalence. The lack of an official church in the federal government does not negate the Christian character of the people, their civic virtue, or the moral culture that sustains the republic. In reality, the treaty and the Constitution reflect a dissenting church model, deliberately separating government from ecclesiastical control while protecting liberty of conscience. The framers' silence on God was a theological constraint, not atheism, ensuring governance would remain free from coercion, yet under the moral guidance of the covenantal God, recognized in Lockean Christianity and Protestant dissent. The United States is a Christian nation because of its dissenting Christian people, whose civic virtue, morality, and culture are rooted in the scriptural imagination and biblical conscience. Pluralism, separation of church and state, and treaties like Tripoli complemented this foundation rather than undermining it. John Adams affirmed this principle. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Thus, the Treaty of Tripoli and constitutional silence codified the dissenting Christian principle: liberty under God with governance free from ecclesiastical domination, yet fully reliant on the same covenantal God recognized by Lockean Christianity and Protestant dissent. And that should be all of them. So hopefully it helps you understand how it's Christian, and that theocratic monarchy is not needed, and neither is this anti-Christian liberalism. That's not needed either. This should help at least help you understand how I believe God has shown me how it's Christian. And then I'll put it in the description box, and if you like it, please like it and subscribe if you like it. And then I guess I'll just end it there. Thank you and God bless.